In the evening of Saturday the 12th of December 1981, the Polish Council of State, very roughly equivalent of the presidential office, decided to introduce martial law throughout the country. In this video, I'm going to show some background video of Poland today, as well as contemporary photographs, although unfortunately I do not have any of my own photographs with me at the time I'm doing this video. I was an eyewitness to some of the events of martial law, and perhaps I'll be able to show them sometime in the future, but as I said, I haven't got them here now. At around 22:30 or thereabouts, the regime went about shutting down telecommunications and the television broadcasting stations. All of these went dead at midnight, and the paramilitary police took over the buildings. In what was clearly a carefully planned operation, at midnight on Saturday the 12th of December to Sunday the 13th of December 1981, units of the Polish paramilitary police, ZOMO, set out to arrest around 10,000 opposition activists. At that moment, the Polish communists organised some 70,000 people to subjugate the Solidarity trade union, involving not only the Ministry of the Interior, but also the army, with its 1,750 tanks, 1,400 armoured vehicles, 500 armoured personnel carriers, 9,000 other vehicles, together with helicopters and transport planes. 1/4 of the entire force was concentrated in and around Warsaw. At 6 in the morning, Polish radio and television broadcast a speech from General Wojciech Jaruzelski, the effective dictator of the country. In this speech, he announced the state of martial law, claiming that this was to avoid a nationwide catastrophe and that he had formed a military council of national salvation. Although his actions had been somewhat similar to those of General Pinochet in Chile only 8 years earlier, he claimed that this was not a military coup leading to a military dictatorship and recognized that force would not resolve the matter. He appealed for people to protect the state from the enemy and working people from lawlessness and violence. Except for those who had been arrested, this was the first most people knew of martial law. This happened during a hard winter. People did not go out so much at night like they do now, and there was no 24-hour television. So the authorities had some time in which to work. Reservists were called up, and they were directed to take over institutions and strategic sectors of the economy, such as certain factories, communications, telecommunications, energy, mining, and ports. Strikes were forbidden, and the activity of the independent trade union Solidarity was outlawed, although the organisation was not yet banned, only suspended. A curfew was introduced as from 7 in the evening. Telephone communications were turned off. Only 2 newspapers were permitted, the Communist Party organs Trybuna Ludu and Żołnierz Wolności. Travel in and out of the country was banned except for repatriation purposes. Schools and universities were closed. The leader of the Solidarity trade union, Lech Wałęsa, was arrested at home and brought to the Warsaw region, where he was allowed to speak to Archbishop Bronisław Dąbrowski and priest Alojzy Orszulik. Then he was imprisoned in a property belonging to the Ministry of the Interior in Skulimów near Warsaw. Primate Józef Glemp, head of the Catholic Church in Poland since July 1981, and who was to become a cardinal in 1983, had been informed by the communist authorities of martial law. He delivered a sermon in Częstochowa in which he called for peace. In the evening, during his next sermon in Warsaw, he appealed for realism and the pointlessness of fighting against martial law. He wanted to avoid what he saw as a fratricidal struggle. On Monday, the 14th of December 1981, reservists were called up to militia units, received weapons and live ammunition. So what brought this situation about? The official reason for martial law was the economy. The shops were almost empty. Rationing had been introduced in 1976 for sugar. The communist system is one of a planned economy, and one might have thought that they might have been able to plan that sugar would be needed. Poland is today the 7th largest sugar beet producer in the world, and potentially could have been so then too. Sugar was, maybe is for older people, a crucial economic marker. People would know the price of sugar. Today, people buy sugar to put in their tea and possibly not much else. However, in countries where the processed food industry is not developed, then people prepare food at home. Sugar was needed not so much for baking cakes and the like, but more for preserving food for the winter. It was therefore of great importance for many people. In 1980, there was a wave of strikes throughout Poland, which led to the formation of the Free Trade Union Solidarity in August 1980. In the original 21 demands of the strikers in Gdansk, there was nothing about changing the political shape of the country, which was accepted, but of changing the economics, something which was perfectly reasonable. Such points included supplying the domestic market with food, as the communist regime would first export, and what they could not sell abroad would be sold in the country. Or, if more quality products were sold in the country, it was done for hard currency, which in theory Poles could not earn in the country. There were special hard currency shops such as Pewex and Baltona. Solidarity demanded a lowering of the age of retirement, abolishing the 6-day week. Most people got only one Saturday off a month then. Improvements to the health service and putting a stop to communist corruption and nepotism, whereby those in the party had access to goods and services which were denied to the average person in the street. The original demands do include other points as well, but I shall deal with the 1980 strikes in a separate video. During the period Solidarity was legal, realizing that it was possible to demand more money or other benefits, there were a wave of other strikes across the country. In most cases, local factory managers, appointed not for their skill at management or their knowledge of the industry, but for joining the Communist Party, had little choice but to back down. The response of the regime was to withhold goods, which led to a flourishing black market. The effects of communism were felt far less on the private farms, which could prosper having access to foodstuffs which they could sell to the industrial centres, even though in theory it had quotas which had to be given to the state. Shortly after the Gdansk Accords, which ended the 1980 strikes, the regime extended its rationing system to include meat, butter, fats, flour, milk and others, all products produced in Poland in theoretically sufficient quantities to satisfy domestic demand. Once more, we see a failure of planning. In 1981, national income decreased by 12% compared to the previous year. Once more, it's a failure to plan. Or is it a plan to fail? On the 10th of September 1981, the Soviet authorities informed the Polish government that due to the situation in Poland, in 1982, the USSR would supply Poland with 64% less crude oil, 40% less gas, and no diesel at all. However, more worrying was the fear that the USSR might invade, together with its communist satellites, as had happened with Czechoslovakia 13 years earlier. However, that did not happen. Indeed, by the end of December 1981, the risk of a Soviet invasion had declined. It was up to the Polish Communist Party to put its own house in order. At the time, this is something I recall very vividly, was the fact that it was widely believed that martial law was a result of Soviet troops being present on the ground in Poland. It was better for Jaruzelski to declare martial law than for Brezhnev to do it for him. According to this rumour, which I heard from several sources, there were Soviet troops somewhere on the Vistula, a rumour that was completely untrue. There were Soviet troops in Poland, but they were in their barracks with orders not to go out, and they were bases. Nonetheless, the crackdown had been approved by Moscow. Throughout the course of the Solidarity period from August 1980 to December 1981, the Soviet Union had considered intervention in Poland, but with declining enthusiasm. It had a war in Afghanistan on its hands and did not want to risk military intervention in Poland and even possibly a conflict with NATO. On the 8th and 9th of December 1981, General Jaruzelski met Marshal Kulikov and the USSR Deputy Prime Minister Baybakov in Brest on the Polish-Soviet border. Jaruzelski demanded economic assistance and hinted at military support for his upcoming action. On the 10th of December 1981, the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union rejected this request and decided that intervention in Poland was to be used as a last resort, only in the event that the Polish Security Forces, Army and the Polish Communist Party could not deal with the situation. It accepted that there could be an anti-Soviet coup within the Polish army in the event of an attack. During the debate, the most vociferous opponent of intervention in Poland was Yuri Andropov, who had been very active in the subjugation of Hungary 25 years earlier. Nonetheless, for years later, Jaruzelski continued to claim that martial law was necessary to stop what he called chaos and Soviet intervention. The response to martial law was a wave of protest and strikes throughout the country, even though the communist regime had tried to cut off the head by arresting the trade union leaders. This was done by violence by the paramilitary police ZOMO. As, however, the state had the most strength, then it won. On the 15th of December 1981, ZOMO attacked and controlled the Szczecin shipyard. I remember the headlines for the Daily Mail on that day. It said, "Last stand in Stettin." On the same day, ZOMO was twice forced out of the Manifest Lipcowe mine in Jastrzębie-Zdrój in Silesia. The third time it entered, it used live ammunition, wounding 4 people. On the 16th of December 1981, ZOMO shot 9 miners dead in the Wujek mine in Katowice. On the 16th of December also, there were major disturbances in Gdansk in which over 100,000 people participated, which continued to the next day when ZOMO used live ammunition, killing at least 1 and wounding 4. Nonetheless, the Lenin shipyard was in the hands of the communists on the 16th of December. The same happened in Kraków, where ZOMO took control of the Lenin steelworks in Nowa Huta, whilst in the streets it had difficulty controlling the huge crowds. On the 22nd of December 1981, the Zemovic Vine in Lędziny in Silesia was occupied. What I believe to be the longest underground protest strike in history was held from the 14th of December to the 28th of December 1981, when 1,000 miners occupied their plant at the Piast mine in Silesia. However, once more, ZOMO took control. There was also passive resistance, go-slows at work, people turning up late, now using the reasonable excuse of poor transport and problems getting to work. More graffiti than before. The V for Victory sign, used by Churchill in the Second World War, was widespread. On the 22nd of December 1981, General Kiszczak said at a meeting of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the Polish United Workers' Party that there's been a breakthrough. Solidarity is no longer able to threaten the people's power. The vast majority of our society has accepted martial law. Jaruzelski was more skeptical. He said, "We won the first battle, but we haven't won the campaign, and that will take a few months, or the war, and it will take 10 years to undo the ravages of social consciousness and lift the economy from its ruins." I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that the declaration of martial law was illegal under then Polish law. And this is something I think other people believe as well. If I've understood this correctly, the Council of State, pursuant to Article 30.5 of the Constitution, was authorised to issue decrees with the force of law. However, Article 31, Section 1 of the Constitution limited this right to periods between sessions of Parliament. However, Parliament was sitting in December 1981. It needs to be pointed out, of course, that this Parliament was a rubber stamp Parliament. It wasn't elected by free elections. Well, there were elections, but only communists and their ilk could stand. Anyway, breaking the law and ignoring the Constitution no more bothered the then communist regime in Warsaw than it has similar regimes in other times, or indeed in other places. One thing that stands out for me is how well organised the crackdown was. If the communists had been this good at organising the economy as they were of oppression, then they mightn't have been in this situation in the first place. I will deal with recent Polish history in other videos. I try not to be, but I'm biased. I was a witness to martial law, and I suspect that this comes through in what I say. However, in situations such as this, one should always try to see the point of view or the objective of the other side, as one does in chess, for example. The trick is to think of the opponent's moves. So let's have a look at some of the arguments in favour of declaring martial law. The Brezhnev Doctrine dictated that all communist countries were in it together, and that an attack on one was an attack on all. Anybody who wants to leave, then the rest must join in and sort the situation out. This, of course, had happened in Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. Now, today we know that this was not the case as far as Poland was concerned. I suspect Jaruzelski also knew it. But on the other hand, I need to point out a report from the US Embassy in Warsaw in April 1981 that it believed that the Soviets will have to enter in large numbers one day. So therefore, in judging past events, we must always consider what was known at the time, not what we know today. The alternative to this was to replace Jaruzelski with someone else who would do the same thing, only more brutally. This, I think, is a better argument. The Kremlin had already replaced leaders it did not like, so Jaruzelski was under pressure. Bear in mind, too, that the people whom the Soviets replaced did not always live to tell the tale. So Jaruzelski might have felt threatened personally. Through the declaration of martial law, the Polish government could request economic assistance from the Soviet Union, particularly in the field of oil, as it had demonstrated that it could put its house in order. The third point is a valid point, I think. Looking back at this now from a standpoint of 40 years, I cannot, however, see any justification and declaration of martial law. In my opinion, it was that of a power grab to grab back the power from the trade unions that the regime had been forced to relinquish in August 1980. The communist regime had already demonstrated that it could not run an economy, and that must have been pretty obvious to everyone. So how it expected to put things better is beyond me. Anyway, so that's a rather biased video in some ways. But others may disagree with me. And to those people, the comments section is at your disposal. I shall do more videos on this subject for the 40th anniversary of martial law. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see more of the stuff I do, then it could help if you subscribed. Apart from helping, it does make me feel better as well.